Set? Okay, Jared, you all set? All right, good afternoon and welcome to our community town hall featuring Tennessee Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton, and our Tennessee State Senator, Paul Bailey. Are we not on?
There we go.
On? Jared? Jared, can you bring the volume up a little bit more? All right, very good. So we've got the Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton, and Senator Paul Bailey. We thank both of you for coming by this afternoon and spending some time with us. In order to start this afternoon's session, I'd like you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then a moment of silence to honor those who are serving in uniform and those who have served in uniform. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. This afternoon's Community Town Hall is being recorded and is also being live streamed for Community Club members to view on the Community Club website. In the audience this afternoon, we do have special guest, Cumberland County Mayor Alan Foster is here with us today. And I want to take just a minute to thank the members of the Governmental Relations Committee for putting this together, and especially Phil Smith. Where are you, Phil? You're out there. So Phil is Phil made all of the arrangements for today's event and did all the coordinations, including the last-minute telephone calls to our guest speakers while they were on the road. So. He's been like a nervous mom to be in the delivery room. So, Speaker Sexton and Senator Bailey are each going to share some comments this afternoon. They'll talk about and highlight some accomplishments of the 2021 legislative session, talk a little bit about the special session, and then we'll share their legislative priorities for the 2022 legislative session. After their initial comments, we'll have an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. And as I did mention, they are on a tight schedule today, so we will move along as quickly and efficiently as we can. So it is now my honor to introduce two very good friends and enthusiastic supporters of Fairfield Glade. Please join me in welcoming Speaker of the Tennessee House, Cameron Sexton, and Tennessee Senator Paul Bailey for their initial comment. Mr. Speaker, I guess you'll start.
Yeah, is this on? Yeah, I got it. Y'all can hear me fine. There we go. I need this at home. That's what I need. It's great to be here. I'm a resident of Fairfield Glade, if you can believe that. I just live about 2 minutes from here. The easiest commute I'd had at any event I went to over the last 2 years. But it's wonderful to be here, and it's great to be here with my good friend, Paul Bailey, who does a wonderful job for you in the State Senate. And I tell Lacey all the time, that, and Greer now too, that they need to call Paul if they have issues at the state level. His office is wonderful to work with. But what I will say is we've had a good year last year. And, you know, we didn't know what to expect with COVID coming in and what that looked like. But what I will say is Tennessee has come out of it stronger than we went into it, if you can believe that. And what I mean by that is in Tennessee, we didn't do like other states. We didn't shut down businesses. We didn't do a whole lot of stuff. We try to mitigate and try to do some things. But what you saw with the state of Tennessee as being one of 7 states who showed positive economic growth from April of last year to April of this year, and it's continuing to head in that direction. Thank you all. And that goes back to the people that you elect to represent you, not just at the state level, but you also have great congressmen and John Rose, who represents this area, and great local leaders like Alan, and your school board people and your county commission people who represent you, and we all work well together to benefit this community and our county and all of the state of Tennessee. But Tennessee, we're doing so well. We have more people moving in, as you all know out here. There's a lot of people moving into our area from the other states that are locking you down and shutting down businesses. We've seen a lot of that. We've also seen a lot of businesses moving into Tennessee, and we've seen businesses kind of expand in our state. We just announced 2 weeks ago that Ford Motor Company is going to build the F-150 electric truck in West Tennessee. That hopefully will be in session this coming week, and then we'll approve that package. And they want to start breaking ground, and it'll be up and running here in the next 2 to 3 years, hopefully in West Tennessee, which will be a huge boost, not only for West Tennessee, but for our state, because that will make us one of the automobile leaders in America between what's happening in Middle Tennessee with West Tennessee and everything else. And really, it makes the Southeast be a big, big player in the automobile industry with what's happening in Alabama and Georgia and northern Mississippi as well. And I think that goes to the policies in our state and other states, the conservative pro-business policies that we've been passing that allows people to come in to build a business, not to be taxed to death, not to be regulated to death, but allow them to grow and prosper in our state. And a couple of things that we have issues with in our state. We do have shortages in the healthcare sector, as well as the hospitality sector. When we come out of COVID, there's just a work shortage. A lot of that, we think, can be blamed to the extra $600 of unemployment that the feds passed down that told people to stay home and it didn't matter if you went to work. And those individuals have not come back to the most part. They're still out there, but we're still working. We have a great governor, Governor Lee, who believes in vocational education. And so we're trying to do better in vocational skills, so when someone graduates high school, they're prepared to go into the workforce. The last thing that we want to have to do in the state of Tennessee is have kids who graduate high school that aren't prepared to go to college, who aren't prepared to go to work, or who aren't prepared to get a job to make money for their family, a good paying job. And so we've really been trying to transform that since Governor Haslam was governor, with Governor Lee being governor, and really focus on this vocational side is really what we need: plumbers, electricians, all that sort of stuff. And so we're making inroads. This year, Paul and I worked to get, I think, $1.5 million of funding for Roane State Community College here so they can build a new science building, a new chemistry lab, which will allow our kids to take those classes here, or students, because there are some adults that go, that will allow those students to take classes in Cumberland County and not have to go to Harriman to take those classes. And so we're hopeful here in the next couple of years you'll see that new building pop up here that will aid our area as well. This year, we passed a couple things on. I won't mention a lot. I'll let Paul talk about a lot of it as well. But the one thing that we did see in our state is with unemployment insurance is I serve on a financial stability group with the governor and the commissioner at FNA and Lieutenant Governor McNally. And one of the issues that we saw during this time when we had the extended benefits that President Biden passed down, the 600, then the 300, is our unemployment system also wasn't functioning well, meaning that there were ample job opportunities in our state, but we're giving people unemployment for 6 months. So they were getting state unemployment for 6 months, then they were also getting that $300 or $600 for 6 months. So there was no incentive to go back to work. There's really no incentive for them to look for work. And if you talk to any business people in our state, and we hope to fix this next year, is there's really nothing that says that will take away your unemployment benefits if you turn down a job or if you go interview for a job and don't report back. There's a mechanism there, but it's not efficient. And so we need to do a better job of doing that. But what we did do this year is we tied our unemployment insurance to the unemployment rate. And so when the unemployment rate is below 5.5%, we lowered from 26 weeks to 12 weeks of benefits. Because if there's ample jobs out there, there's ample opportunities, which means you don't need to be on government assistance for 6 months. So that's going to be one of the, I think, biggest changes that you will see. It's going to take us about a year to implement that process, but it is coming. We did fund it, and we are moving to make the system more efficient as well. And so our budget, we started doing very well in our budget about 6 years ago. We're still running billion-dollar revenue surpluses in our state. And unlike some other states, we don't spend it and raise government spending. What we try to do is do one-time spending, which means there's a lot of deferred maintenance that our states had to do. There's like some capital projects. We've been trying to spend it on one-time things, also give back tax cuts back to the individuals of Tennessee and to businesses to help us keep prospering. Because one thing that we believe in is the Ronald Reagan approach, which is when you reduce taxes, you actually increase individual spending and individual savings. And that's what we're trying to do here in Tennessee. The last thing I'll mention is we also been focusing on health care in our state. We all want affordable, accessible health care for everybody. And we can achieve that. But in order to achieve that, we have to be able to put you and your provider in charge of your health care. And what I mean by that is right now, if you look at it as a wheel on your car and you have the center of your wheel, the insurance companies right now are the center of your wheel and everybody else is on the outside, which means they are making decisions for everybody else. And so we passed some PBM reform this year that we need to go back and fix. We've done some other things to help with that in insurance. But what our long-term goal is to put you and your provider as the centerpiece of your health care, and then you all make the decisions that affect you personally and not have the insurance dictate to the physicians what they can and cannot do for you simply because they are looking at some timeline in the book that says they should do this instead of that before they do this. It should be a decision between you and your physician and providers. So I'll stop there. I'm looking forward to the Q&A, but we are very blessed to live in a state like Tennessee. We're very blessed to have you all as part of our state here in Tennessee, because what makes us a rich state is the ability to have diverse people with diverse opinions. A lot of them are Republican opinions in Tennessee, but have a lot of different opinions from individuals that help us have those conversations that we need to. We should never be afraid of having conversations with one another and having disagreements with one another. If you don't have disagreements, you're never going to be able to make something better than what it was. We'd still be back in the Model T if we weren't having disagreements over what a great car could be, maybe. So we need to be able to have those conversations. At the end of the day, not sit there and say, I don't like you because I don't like your opinion. That doesn't work. That's not long-term success. But really, that we can disagree, we come to a conclusion, hopefully, even if you don't agree with the direction, at least you know where the person is and where they're coming from. Because half the battle that we spend in Nashville, and it happens there too, is not understanding your perspective. And so in this room, y'all may have 50 different perspectives on something, but it's coming from your life and your circumstance, and we shouldn't discount it because that's what drove you or drives you, and you are vital to making sure that we're successful so that we can do what is needed for this community. Thank you all very much.
Senator Bailey, I have someone parked a blue Infiniti SUV in one of the drive lanes out on Stonehenge Boulevard, and the police department is here, so if you parked your car out on Stonehenge, you're going to need to go move it. You can maybe slide out the back door, but they are outside, so if you don't go out and move it, it'll be gone. Paul?
Do you think we'd make that person feel more comfortable if everyone stood up? Do like we do at church from time to time. Everyone stand up, turn around, shake your neighbor's hand, introduce yourself so they could slip out. Well, it's awesome to be here with you this afternoon and to be able to have this town hall. This is the first official town hall that I think that I've been able to participate in at Fairfield Glade. Make sure he cleared the door. I saw him parked there. But it's great to be able to have a town hall meeting, and you know, with COVID in the past year and a half, we've not been able to have these type meetings, and that's been something was kind of a letdown for me as far as being able to interact with the constituents that I have throughout the 15th Senate District, because it's always important that we hear from you and hear your perspective and your ideas as we go to Nashville. And I can say that I have no better partner than Cameron Sexton. He and I, that's right, give him a hand. He and I have been friends for many years, and I can tell you, we've fussed over issues, we've shaken hands over issues, we've talked through issues, but at the end of the day, he and Lacey and Greer are some of my best friends, and I appreciate him and what he does for the state of Tennessee and what he does for all of you in here. And Mayor Foster, he is doing a great job for your county. He works tirelessly because out of the 6 counties that I represent, I probably hear from your mayor more than I do any of the other mayors. That's right. That's good. So he is always looking out for the best interest of Cumberland County. So some of you may or may not know that I'm in the trucking business, and the question that I have, are there any retired truckers in here?
He's looking to hire. He's looking to hire.
I have applications. I have applications. And if you even think that you would want to be a truck driver. Now, all of you have heard in the past few days about the supply chain debacle that we have. And as someone that's been in the trucking business for the past 36 years, I'm a third-generation trucker. My grandfather was actually trucking in Tennessee before there were even an interstate system, before there was an interstate system in the state. And then he taught his 3 sons, and my dad taught me, and then my children are also. So we actually have a 4th generation working in the trucking industry. But I can tell you that it is a reality of what you hear on the news day in and day out about supply chains being backed up, especially at our ports. I met yesterday, I was in Atlanta, I met with a customer who's actually from the country of Hungary, and they do a lot of business here in the state. And they were paying last year $1,500 for a container to come over to the United States into the Port of Savannah. They're now having to pay $9,000 for that same container to come in. Now, what they used to pay a freight company like myself to move the product from that port, say, to Crossville, Cookeville, Tennessee, an average of $800 from Savannah, they're now having to pay $1,500 to $2,000 for that same container. Now, why do I say all that? I say that to let you know it is reality that we're facing inflation in our nation. The news media and the current federal administration can tell you all day long that we're at a 3%, a 4% inflation. Folks, it's higher than that. And I can just see it just simply because of our supply chain and the cost that's associated with moving those goods. Because it's going to affect, if it hasn't already, each and every one of us in this room today. When you go to the store and you buy a gallon of milk, when you go and pull up at the gas station and you buy gas, when you buy that pack of bacon or whatever clothes that you wear, the cost of all of that is going to increase. Now, the good news is Tennessee is winning. And when I say that it's winning, former Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey used to say, it matters who governs. And Tennessee has had great leadership over the past 12 years. And because of that leadership, we have been able to continue to grow our economy here in the state of Tennessee. It's been because of people like Cameron Sexton that was there before me, and because of his leadership and those that came before me, putting policies in place that we're able to see a robust economy in the state of Tennessee today. I mentioned earlier, we keep winning. We heard about Ford Motor Company coming to West Tennessee. I can tell you that as someone that chairs the Commerce and Labor Committee, that was 4,000 acres in West Tennessee that a couple of administrations ago gave to the state of Tennessee for a lot of money. A lot of people made money off of that property in West Tennessee, and we've been, over the last several years, trying to market that to get a big manufacturer to come in there. Think of it this way. Volkswagen in Chattanooga is on 2,000 acres. That was 4,000 acres. So we had to have someone like Ford Motor Company to come in, and we're very thankful that the state of Tennessee was able to put forth policies that allowed, he's back. We didn't tell on you. Put policies in place that allowed for Ford Motor Company to want to move here. And in that same week, we hear about Smith & Wesson moving out of Massachusetts into Tennessee. Many of you in this room have lived in other parts of the nation, and you moved to Tennessee and you moved to Fairfield Glade because what you have seen, the policies that have been put in place over the last several years in Tennessee that caused you to want to come here. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to want to work. And so I would just say to you today, I've got applications. I'm needing truck drivers, just like every trucking company across the nation is needing. Whenever they talk about opening those ports up 24/7, folks, I can tell you, I have trucks in and out from the West Coast to the East Coast. Those ports are already open 24/7. And I can also tell you that FedEx and UPS and all of the freight companies out here, they are at max capacity now delivering, simply because the workforce that they need to make those deliverables of those goods is just not there like it used to be. I've told this story several times that in 2013 and 14, when I was running for the state senate for the first time, one question that was always asked of me at that time was, what are you going to do to create jobs for Tennessee? Well, folks, now in 2000, and as we move into the 2022 election year, it's what are we going to do to be able to create workers, to be able to fill all the jobs that we've been able to create over the past several years. So with that, I'll sit down. I'm also, like Speaker Sexton, I'm looking forward to your questions. If I don't know the answer, he does.
Thank you, Speaker Sexton and Senator Bailey. This time they will take some questions. What we'd ask you to do is we have the microphones in each one of these aisles. We'd ask you to go back to the microphones to ask your questions. And we're also, I want to give everybody the opportunity to ask a question. So if you came with 15 or 20 questions, ask one and wait for the other folks to go through the microphone, and then you're more than welcome to come back and ask another one. But let's try to give everybody an opportunity that has a question to ask.
This is just about something that was announced. You announced that you would be speaking about a special session.
Yeah, we can talk about that if you want to. Yeah, you want to go to a special session? So there's two special sessions we're hoping. I think we're getting to the second one. But the first one begins on Monday, October 18th. It starts at about 4 p.m. It should last about 3 days. It's dealing with the Ford Motor Company. Part of the incentive package has to be approved. The legislature is the only one that can appropriate money. And so we're going to go in. Also, there's some legislation that's needed to do some things with the Mega Site Authority Board to allow them to have more control over the project. And so we're going to go in. We should be done hopefully by Wednesday, Thursday morning at the latest. And then after that, hopefully on October 27th, we'll have our second special session. I think the House and the Senate both have the necessary signatures to call it. And so it will be a legislative called special session, which will only be the third in our state's history of having the legislature call a special session. It's going to deal with COVID topics. It's going to deal with mask mandates, vaccinations, also liability for businesses, COVID business liability, maybe some whether or not mandating a vaccine is discriminatory if you fire somebody, talk about unemployment, Also touch base with the 6 independent health departments in our state, which they're not here, thankfully, but they are causing problems in Shelby County and Davison County. What you have in those independent health departments are bureaucrats who have more authority than the local elected officials. And we need to go in and fix that and not have them be able to shut down a business or do whatever they want to in those 6 counties just because they have the power to do it outside of the objections of the local elected officials. So we want to fix that while we're there as well. There's a couple of other issues. Thank you. There's a couple of other issues that we're going to look at. The quarantining protocols in the schools. You have some schools that only quarantine you if you show symptoms. You have others that if you're exposed and you're not showing symptoms, they quarantine you. So you have some school systems that have 100 kids out with 10,000 quarantine, and you have some that have 10 kids out with 5 people quarantine. And so it's all over the map, and we need to do a better job of uniform standards across the state so that parents understand what is going to be able to go to school or not, because that puts a hardship on the parents. And the biggest thing I hope that we do is we return back to the point where government does not force you to do things that you do not want to do for yourself. I'll get right there. And so that's what there's some other things we're going to be talking about on the 27th. Yeah, so there will be a couple other things that we talk about on the 27th of that week. We think that's going to take about 2 weeks to get there. But we're ready to go. I think you'll see an announcement here soon that will take place. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything, Paul?
We have the 2 microphones for anybody that would like to ask questions. Please step up there. We want to make sure that your questions end up being recorded. So ma'am, go right ahead.
Hi, I asked this for a friend of mine who is out of the state because she's very ill with COVID. She went. I thought it was. Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm asking this for a friend of mine and letting you know that this happened to her in Cookeville. She is not vaccinated. I am not. I do not want to be. That is my personal choice. She got COVID, went to Cookeville to the hospital, and was turned away from treatment because she was unvaccinated. This is atrocious. What kind of assurance are we going to get that if we are unvaccinated, that we are going to be treated if we need to be?
Well, let me just say that I toured the Cookeville Regional Medical Center a couple of weeks ago and went through the COVID infusion center, and that has got to be a unique story because a lot of the people that they were treating in the infusion center were unvaccinated individuals. And as I have mentioned many times, I will defend your right to not have the vaccine just as much as I'll defend the person that wants to have the vaccine. I think it is a personal choice. I would also say that if your friend was turned away, certainly contact my office, and I will be happy to contact Cookeville Regional Medical Center because unless there was some extenuating circumstance that I don't know about or you don't know about, they should have provided medical treatment for them. Now, they were concerned for a few days that they were going to run out of the monoclonal infusion, and so they scaled back on the number of appointments that they were making, and they expressed that to me the day that I toured. But as far as I'm aware, they did not, or they should not, have turned away anyone.
All right, well, I appreciate that. I'll let her know. It was about a month ago that this happened. And I want you to take this back to the General Assembly. We do not want a vaccine mandate, period.
One of the surprising legislative changes that came up recently was that there was no longer a requirement for classes and certification for concealed carry. Many of us who went through it, and we know the value of learning all of the safety features and the state laws, We're concerned that that was eliminated, and I'm wondering whether there is any impact in our state as a result of that legislative change.
What I will say is when we pass that legislation, you can still go and do the class if you so be. What we discussed was that class was only done on the front end. It was never done for the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 15. So at what point does it not become effective anymore, right? And so then we balance that with your constitutional right of being able to carry. And so were the framers in mind of, do you need to know how to go through a class before you're able to carry? And where we landed was, if you can legally purchase a gun, not a firearm, because we're just talking about handguns, we're not talking about long guns, so this is just dealing with handguns. If you can legally purchase a handgun in the state of Tennessee, which means you can get through all the little things, then you should be able to legally carry without a permit. I think that's where we thought the intent of the Founding Fathers were and the framers of our Constitution. And so we allowed that to happen. Now, should you go get some training? Yes. Should it be more than once in a lifetime? Absolutely, right? We just had Olivia, who's my oldest daughter, we did some driving with her, and I got a little bit grayer. But what I will say is even that should be refreshed, right? And so if you want to carry a gun, please do, if you can legally do it. But also go get trained on a regular basis, not just once in a lifetime. But the other thing that we did is we tried to balance it with what we were hearing from the concerns. So you hear about not infringing on a law-abiding citizen's right, because that's what we thought a permit was doing. We're infringing on your right to be able to legally carry because the criminals were committing crimes. So what we did is we said, we're not infringing on you anymore, but now if you're a criminal, we're going to increase your penalties. And so if you steal a gun from a car or from a home, we've increased your penalties by 150%. If you decide to commit a crime with a gun, we've increased your penalties by 150%. And if you're just walking down a street and you're a felon and you're not supposed to have a gun, let me just tell you, inside the state of Tennessee, you don't want to be caught because we throw the book at you. Because what we decided to do was not infringe on your right, but make it to where the criminals do not want to be caught stealing, committing a crime, or even caught with a gun inside the state of Tennessee.
And one thing that I would add is that you still have to have the class to receive your permit to have reciprocity if you want to carry in another state other than Tennessee that has reciprocity with Tennessee. I've spoken to a couple of individuals that provide handgun carry permit classes, and they have not seen a decrease in the number of students that are coming through their classes because people still want to have that ability to not only carry in Tennessee, but for them to be able to travel outside of the state of Tennessee. And there are many people that they want to have the right to carry, but yet they're not comfortable with handling that firearm. So we're still seeing, based on those two, now they may be outliers. They may be two people that are just receiving a lot of students coming through to get their permit and go through the handgun carry permit class. But I think we're still seeing a lot of people go through for the reciprocity.
First of all, I'd like to thank both of you for all your support and effort with the wind turbines. And it was a big issue here several years ago. Okay, my question has to do with immigration. Is there anything happening in the state of Tennessee to help support our border states, to help Texas and Arizona and New Mexico?
Well, I'll take, and I know the speaker, one thing about being speaker, you have a lot more information than just a member. So he can a lot of times expound on more than I know. But Tennessee, for the past several months, has had National Guard troops on the Texas border assisting the Texas National Guard with our immigration issue that we currently have taking place there on the southern border. So Tennessee has been actively involved in that. Now, some ask about refugees coming into the state. Many times the federal government contracts with with like the Catholic Charities and other charity organizations to bring those refugees into the state. And when that happens, they bypass state government by going through a religious organization or going through an organization that is a nonprofit that basically comes in, brings the refugees into the state. They provide them food, shelter, and clothing for a period of time, and a lot of times other forms of government assistance. And it's hard for us as a state government to be able to step in and to block that whenever the federal government is actually contracting with those other organizations. Now, we saw in Chattanooga earlier this year where we had some refugees coming in, and they had created several layers within this organization as far as the refugees coming in, and we were able to peel back the onion just a little bit, and the speaker can possibly expand on that just a little bit, but we were able to peel back the onion and be able to stop some of the flow that we saw there. Do you remember what I'm...
Yeah, so the problem we were having, and we had the same problem when President Obama was president. We didn't have the problem when President Trump was president. Now we have the problem when President Biden's president. So you can kind of see the cycle as it's going on. But I will tell you, President Biden rolled back all of President Trump's immigration reforms and things that he did to try to have a better vetting process, a better communication with law enforcement and everybody else in locals and states, and all that got pulled back. And so what you saw in Chattanooga were all these, they had the kids coming across, trying to reunite them with, they say, other family members who are here. And they housed them in Chattanooga. They didn't tell us. They were flying them in at midnight. They were putting them on buses. And as I said one time, my mama used to tell me nothing good happens after midnight, and the federal government's shipping people in after midnight. There must not be something good going on, because why wouldn't you just do it during the day? And so they were bringing them into all these states. They weren't telling us. They had a contract with this person from Chattanooga. And so they started housing them. And then what did we see? We started seeing abuse and assaults going on those kids in there to a tune of more than you ever want to think about. And so we were able to yank the license, and they're no longer being able to be in Chattanooga because there's nothing licensed here inside the state of Tennessee. Now, I will tell you, part of the problem that we have, and I know there's been a lot of questions about Afghan refugees coming in, there's not a vetting process. And they were taking them, and they didn't know who was getting on the plane, and they were putting them in, and you've seen stories where they were at an Air Force base, and they just let them Uber out the door, and they have no idea who they are or where they went. And so what Governor Lee has said and what we have said is we would like to know who these people are before they come in our state. We understand if people want to leave a country due to exile and whatever else, but we also should know who these people are before we allow them to come into our country and to our state, which we're not getting the opportunity to know what that is. And so as a state, Governor Lee pushed back, and it was interesting. We had a breakfast one morning with a bunch of legislators, and he was talking about a call that he had with the Republican Governors Association, and they all were talking, and what President Biden was doing is he wasn't trying to send them to Democrat states. He was calling all the Republican governors and trying to get them to go into the Republican states, and every governor said that they told President Biden, we're not going to accept the refugees until you can tell us who they are, how they're vetted, and what's going on. So no. You think President Biden listened? No, he just ended up sending them anyway, right? But the thing is he wasn't sending them at that point in time. He might have changed his tune now. But this time back during session this year, he wasn't sending them into the Democrat governor state. He was just trying to send them into the Republican governor state. And so we will continue to evaluate what's going on. But we also set up a bipartisan committee in the House and the Senate to look at the immigration issues, to look at the refugee issues, and see what we can do as a state, and how can we create standing to push back, and how can we create standing to push back on the executive orders that are coming through, just like the one that says if you're a business with 100 more employees, you have to mandate the vaccine, or they have to test negative weekly. So we're kind of looking at that. It's a new era of trying to figure out how we can push back. And I think you've seen Florida do it. I think you've seen Texas do it. You've seen Montana just join the fight the other day. South Dakota is there. And what you've seen is all the Republican governors starting to coalesce around and working together, which is a very good thing, all across the country, to push back. And I think what you will see in this next election cycle is you're going to see Republicans pick up anywhere from 5 to 7 governorships all across our country, which will be a good thing with the current administration. So when we go in on the 27th, Texas, Governor Abbott came back and said you can't force somebody to take a vaccine. Montana said it's your discrimination against someone if you mandate that they take a vaccine. So we're looking at all the different options. We're looking at Florida. Hopefully on October 27th, by the time we're done, we've come out with a Tennessee consensus. It may be a little bit different, but it should build on what's been going on currently.
Interestingly enough, my concern is the same issue, but before I even mention it, I want to say that I am pleased with many things that you are doing. We share one thing in common very strongly, and that's fiscal responsibility. You both do well. We have a state that is always in the right position financially. You forgot to mention one big one. This state has been number 2 in the country as far as soluble pensions, and that is a good thing. Look around the country, see states that are in terrible problem. We're looking good. Only Wisconsin has a more liquid pension than Tennessee. But I also noticed the last topic again, as the opening question was COVID. I want to say that the question is not, should you have to get a shot? Should it be mandated? The question we need to answer, is it the right thing to do, everything else being correct? Physical health, religion, whatever. Should we be encouraging people getting the shot? We have leaders that say yes. One sitting in this room right here does a beautiful job in both the Crossville Chronicle, other newspapers, stating along with, and I had the chance to talk to our good mayor, I had the chance to talk to Bill Lee, had the chance to talk to Rose. All 3 of them had the courage to make sure it was in print that barring the fact a shot should not be a mandate, it may have personal reasons why you shouldn't get it, but all in all, it is something you should look and take a hard look. All 3, Lee, Rose, and our good mayor, have been vaccinated, and all did encourage people without other circumstances, not a mandate, to get these shots. All we had to do is look at our hospitals 2 weeks ago. We were at 100% capacity. And you know, out of those number of weeks, most of them, between 96 and 100% of the beds were occupied by a unvaccinated person. So think hard. Shouldn't be a law, but maybe it is the right thing to do. My question tonight to both of you, I haven't had a chance to hear publicly your position, not whether or not the cliche is it legal, I have a right to, all those rights are there. But do you personally recommend that people take a hard look, and if everything looks right, to go ahead and become vaccinated? I'd like to hear that from both of you.
Well, I'll jump in and answer your question from my perspective. And I have said this on the radio and social media. It is between you and your health care provider. If you and your health care provider believe that it is in your best interest, your best health interest to receive the vaccine, then I encourage you to follow the advice of your health care provider. Now, I will state that I have been vaccinated. And the reason being is that I have a very dear friend that lost their stepfather and their mother within 24 hours and lost their brother within 3 weeks of each other. And at that point in time, I realized that, look, maybe it's time for me to take the vaccine. I've never been an anti-vaxxer, but I go back to my previous statement that I said earlier. I will defend your right to take the vaccine as much as I will defend another person's right not to take the vaccine. And for me to make a public statement or to encourage people, I'll say to all of you today, if you want the vaccine, take the vaccine. If you don't want the vaccine, don't take the vaccine. But I've been asked on numerous occasions, why don't you as a state senator come out and encourage people to take a vaccine? I go back to my original point. It is between you and your health care provider. What do I know as a truck driver and as a state senator to be able to tell you to go get a vaccine?
And by the way, as a private citizen, I agree with your position, but as a leader who people look to for advice, even though it isn't lockstep, they look to you for advice, in my mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll follow up. I mean, I think there's some personal responsibility here, right? And so the thing that makes us a great country is we are able to think for ourselves and make decisions for ourselves. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're indifferent. But we live in a country where you should be able to make these decisions for yourself. You should be having government make it for you. Now, I've told the media because they ask, because they don't think I'm vaccinated, and they ask, and I tell them, yes, I am, because I talked to my physician. The best interest of me was to take it. They don't want to report it. They stop asking the questions, and they go somewhere else, because that's not the story that they want to portray, right? That's just not what they want to do, which is fine. I understand. But let me tell you this. It is a conversation between you and your provider, because they know your health. They know your family's health. They know what's best for you, and you all come to an agreement on what's best for you and how to move forward. That's the best way to do it. And that way, I'm not here trying to dictate to you what you should do. But what I will say is when you look at the COVID numbers, and I think the comment was the hospitals were full, which is an accurate statement. But what I will say is they were not full of COVID patients. The hospitals were still open. They were still seeing other patients, which is what you want them to do. And you still have people who had heart attacks and people who were needing surgeries, and you still had all that happening. But the problem is you also had COVID hitting at the same time as other things this last time. But the hospitals were running about a third COVID patients when they were full. They're still full today. But the COVID has dropped to below 2,000 patients in the state in the hospital, but they're still full because we have other people who are sick who need help. ICUs are still running at 90%, but that's understandable. The other thing you had is you had people who said that kids were sick and kids were driving these pediatric hospitals and that all these pediatric hospitals were full. Because what they want you to believe is that they're full of all COVID patients. And the pediatric hospitals were not full of COVID patients. They got up to where we had, I think the highest point we got was 90 to 100 kids who are younger than 20, or it's like younger than 18, I guess, in the children's hospital. Think about this. 100 kids statewide were in a pediatric hospital. 100, okay? That's less than a third of the beds that we have across the state for pediatrics. What were they in the hospital for? RSV. The question is, why do we have RSV hitting in the summer and not usually in the winter months, like happens by clockwork? Anybody want to take a guess? Because the previous year we didn't go to school. Previous year we put masks on kids. So what did we do? All we did is change the timeline when RSV was going to come back. And what do we create? A perfect storm of kids who had RSV and COVID at the same time, and the pediatric hospitals were full. RSV is respiratory distress virus. They get it at a younger age. They overcome it. And the other thing is you had another thing called MIS, which I think is multi-infectionary syndrome that kids can get. If they get treatment, they survive. They were surviving, but you saw an increase in that as well because you had all this stuff hitting at the same time. What I will say is last year when we were talking about COVID, no one had the ability to see what the data was and to work through it. So we're all shooting blind. And so everybody sort of did what they could and mitigated it the best they can. After a year of data, everybody in this room has an opinion on what they think COVID is or COVID isn't. And what we do know is what the data shows, which is correct. The people who were in the hospital were unvaccinated. That's a fact by the majority of them. But we also know that just because you're vaccinated does not mean that you can't get COVID. Just because you're vaccinated does not mean that you can't give it to someone else as an infection, right? What being vaccinated means is what the data shows is you're less likely to be in the hospital, less likely to die. That's what getting the vaccine does. It doesn't stop you or immunize you like the measles, mumps, and stuff from keeping you from getting it. And so I think our people in America are smart enough to make the decisions for themselves on what's best for them and their family. That's why we said that we don't think you should do masks in schools. You should give the parents the opportunity to make the healthcare choice that's best for their kids. And so as we go through this, you have to be careful because if you take away your right to make these decisions for yourself, whether you make the right one or the wrong one, that's up to you. But if we continue to let government make those decisions for you, the future of the younger generation, what are they going to do? Because what I see right now is I see the people who are 35 to 60 pushing back. I see the people who were 65 and older making the decisions last year, get vaccinated, I'm going to mitigate it, I'm not going to go around people, because that's what they grew up doing. They didn't have to be told to do anything. They didn't have to be forced to make the decision. But if you're forcing the decision on the young people, you're creating a generation of people who will not think for themselves. And we can't have that.
Mike Lindell, my pillow guy, would say, I knew you would. My question, as you're beginning soon to gather up caption bills, what do you and Governor Lease see as priorities in the next legislation? Could you give us a brief?
We haven't started discussing because we have the one coming up next week and we have the COVID special session, which I think is really important for us as a state. I think if you're looking at next year, he's wanting to do some education reform. BEP is on his priority, changing the BEP formula, seeing if you can do something more based on outcomes, rewarding school districts who provide good outcomes and not paying everybody the same. I completely understand it. Trying to get the formula right is going to be difficult in 4 months. But if you're wanting to create something, I mean, if you're running a business and you don't give anybody a pay raise and everybody makes the same amount, whether you're doing a good job or great job, what's the incentive to do great, right? And so there's an incentive there that needs to be part of BEP to reward the schools that are great and incentivize those who aren't to be able to do more to get more money, right? And so I think we're moving in the right direction. Can we get there in 4 months? I don't know. Outside of that, I mean, I think unemployment, we're going to do some stuff on unemployment reform, some more pushback on that. We are doing some more on public assistance, trying to bring in more accountability to help people get off their feet and have an opportunity to be successful and not have government keep you down, which is what it's doing right now. And so we're just starting to look at next year, what that may look like. We've been really focusing more on this, or at least I have on October 27th when we come back in for the COVID stuff, because I think that's the big issue right now driving Tennessee in our state. People being worried about losing their job if they don't take the vaccine, and not being able to get unemployment if they do lose their job. You have parents who are worried about sending their kids to school because they don't want their kids to wear a mask. And so there's a lot of things that we need to do here before we get to January.
Yeah, I think, was it?
Okay, thank you both for being here today. Thank you both for being here today. My name is Linda Waters, and I'm an active member of the Fairfield Glade Bicycle Group. The recently completed expansion of Peavine Road has been a remarkable and beneficial occurrence in our community. It has transformed traffic flow into and out of the Glade in a very positive way. It also has attracted the attention of our growing number of bicyclists. The wide shoulders present lanes of riding not before seen anywhere in the Glade that I'm aware of. Ridership on Peavine Road has never been greater, and the expectation is that it will continue to increase. And that increasing use of Peavine Road by our cyclists brings up the very important issue of safety. Speaker Sexton and Senator, would you be willing to work with our bike group, Mayor Foster, and commissioners in Cumberland County to see that bicycle signs and striping are added to this new section of Peavine Road to improve the safety for everyone, not just for cyclists, but also for automobile traffic?
So, as someone that chaired Transportation Committee in the Senate for a couple of years and working with TDOT, I'll be more than happy to work with Speaker Sexton and your group and see if we can identify some areas that could definitely have signage and stripage that you have mentioned. I mean, that's something that we'd be more than happy to work with your group and see if we couldn't accommodate.
I think, yeah, I mean, we'll be happy to work with you. There's grants available through TDOT that would help you with that. I think the mayor's office and local government would have to apply for those grants through TDOT to get you bicycle lanes. It was the same thing with the lights. There was one in line, but once the project's approved and once it's finished, it kind of, everything else goes away. So there's grants available to do that for signage and whatever else y'all want to do. I will say I've seen a lot of people riding bikes around here, but they're also, do you have one of those motorized bikes? Yeah,
Correct.
That seems to be the new thing. But I've seen more and more people riding bikes, which is a great thing if you want to ride bikes. So we'll be happy to help the mayor's office any way that we can to help get those grants back to the community.
And one short comment, this is not a question. You're talking about giving the control back to the people and not the government. I feel like I can drive and I don't need a license. So does that mean I should be able to have control of that and we shouldn't be required to get driver's licenses if we don't think it's necessary?
Well, in order to vote in Tennessee, you need a form of ID. So I would make sure that you have a driver's license to go.
That's not
But also, I would say in order to drive, the process has always been to have a driver's license. Yes, you need a driver's license, but you need it for more than just driving. I think if you wanted to say, should you have an annual test, that would probably be an interesting question to pose out here to people who want to say, you know, should you only be tested when you're 16 and not tested when you're 25, 40, 50, or whatever age? But my feeling is, yeah, you know what? You want to be able to drive, you need to have a driver's license. That's right.
Why should I be required to and not required in its back?
Well, the Second Amendment is a constitutional right that you have the right to own a gun and have a gun. That's a constitutional right. It is, Second Amendment, that's a constitutional right.
Vaccination, not guns.
Okay, well, on guns, you don't have to have an ID. For vaccination, what was your link on vaccination and driving?
You're saying that we should be mandating vaccinations or masks or anything, that we should be responsible for that ourselves. And I'm just saying, I'm a responsible person. Why do I need a driver's license?
Well, in reality, if you don't have to have a driver's license, state law requires you having a driver. But if you want to drive, you don't.
So if I don't get a vaccination, it's okay to arrest me. just because you're a Republican?
Yes, sir, please.
Speakers, hello. Speaker, Senator, I thank you and the rest of the Tennessee legislators for your attention to this critically important issue of COVID. Obviously, as you stated in your introduction, there are many opinions on this. Some months ago, my 52-year-old, otherwise healthy nephew died suddenly of a heart attack from a blood clot a week after he received his second COVID shot. I feel very upset at the condescending tone of some people who seem to think those of us who do not want to be vaccinated are Luddites of some sort and obviously mentally deficient. I have had COVID. I recovered from it. Prevailing medical opinion states that my antibody and resistance to COVID status is, I think they're currently saying, about 25 times better than someone who's been vaccinated. There are hundreds of millions of us who have recovered from COVID and are immune. Giving those people the shot can, in some cases, actually kill them or be very dangerous. There are many sources, including the CDC's own vaccine adverse event reporting system that currently is about 16,000 deaths attributed to getting the vaccine. Out of 250 million, that's not a lot. I agree. But for those of us who already have immunity and don't want to even take that very small risk, that is the crux of the matter where you're saying you want to put a physician and an individual back in charge of their health care. So I commend you and your attitude and the steps you're going to be taking. The other thing that I would like to ask you is, has it ever been brought up that states have the right to decide what is an over-the-counter medication? Both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are over-the-counter medications in over half the world. There is data out there that the places where that is used for prophylactic reduction of river blindness in Africa have extremely low COVID rates. When the America's Frontline Doctors talked to the U.S. Congress, the opposing, well, I can't say the opposing, there were two contingents of individuals there listening to their testimony on the effectiveness. These are practicing clinical doctors, hundreds of them, that testified that these drugs have positive use. They've been issued billions of times throughout the world. Any adverse effects have been extremely overblown, in my opinion, in the press. So, would the state of Tennessee ever consider making those drugs over the counter so we could circumvent this ridiculous protocol that prevents an effective medicine from being given to Tennessee citizens?
I would have to look at it. I'm not sure that it's not driven by the FDA. I would have to look to see if state has the ability to move things over counter. I know as far as controlled substances, we can move things up on the controlled substance scale. We can go from a 5 to a 4 to a 3 to 2, but we can't move anything down on a controlled substance. So I have to see if we have that capability of moving drugs off of a prescription status into an over-the-counter status through the FDA. I'm not sure that we have the capability to do that.
I may be misinformed on that, but if we do have the power, would you consider?
I mean, we'd be happy to take a look at it. At this point, I don't know. But what I can tell you is we passed a law a few years ago that does allow the physicians and the providers to prescribe off-label usage for medication. So if your provider feels like that it is a drug that does work, they should be able, inside the state of Tennessee, to prescribe it for you.
Okay, well, when I did get COVID, I called my physician, and she said that is not their protocol, and they cannot do that. And I said, well, can you refer me to a physician that will? And she could not. And I believe the only place you can do it is get a video consult over the internet for a mere $100, and then some doctor somewhere will give you a prescription.
I would have to look. I don't think it's against state law to prescribe something off-label. It may be against their practice, or the physician may not want to do it, but I believe they have the capability of doing that. They do it for other drugs. They provide off-label. I would think they could for that. Now, it might be internally they don't want to do it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
My question is about election integrity And when you're talking about the 2022 election and you're talking about the federal government bringing people in the middle of the night that you don't know who they are, we can't maybe prevent other states from changing their stats in the middle of the night like what happened in the 2020 election, but what is being done at least on the local state level for Tennessee to prevent local elections and local Senate for the state Senate and state House and all that kind of thing? What's been doing and for preventing people that have been brought into our state from illegally voting?
Well, great question, because since the election of last year, there's lots of discussion about voter integrity. And I can say in the state of Tennessee, I'm very proud of our election laws that we've enacted over the past several years. Number one, you have to have an ID to be able to vote. And that is... To me, voting is one of the most sacred rights as an American that you have, and that we should always protect that you as an individual have the right to vote, and you should only be able to vote once. But led by Speaker Sexton this year, the legislature passed legislation relative to early vote or for absentee voting, to where we are now placing a watermark on those absentee ballots to make sure and to ensure that there cannot be fraud in the state of Tennessee, especially when it comes to those early type votes. So Tennessee has, I think, been a leader in the nation. I think from the legislature to our Secretary of State, Hargett, he has worked diligently to make sure that we have the most honest elections in the state and also in the nation.
One other question with that, though: what is to prevent the electronic portion, when you use these electronic voting machines that can be changed from another country or another part of our country? What's being done to prevent the electronic voter fraud?
Well, and so that was a question that many legislators met with Secretary Hargett, as well as the election coordinator for the state of Tennessee, because we wanted to ensure, again, that we had voter integrity. And of course, it is up to the individual counties, as far as their election offices, what machines that they choose to use inside that county. So make sure that your local election commission is using the proper machines that that fit your county and fit your region. But I can say that as far as meeting with the Secretary of State and the election coordinator, they felt very confident that the machines that we were using had the best safeguards in place. But I will say this: it is electronic, but at the same time, I do believe that we have the best voter laws in the nation. And Speaker can...
Yeah, I mean, what I will say, the photo ID, there's only certain photo ID, so you can't run out to Kinko's and make a photo ID and vote in Tennessee. It's certain photo IDs that you have to have. And so we were one of the first states that passed it, and I think it's worked very well in our state. It's really cut down. The other thing that we've done is the Secretary of State, when he came in, Trey Hargett, every month our local election administrator goes through the death certificates and purges people off who died that month. So it's an instantaneous process. And we've purged a lot of dead people off the voting rolls, to tell you. The other thing that we have been able to do is, last year when you saw all these lawsuits going, and it really does matter who's president and who's governor, because that's who appoints the judges. And it also matters where you file the cases. And so we had issues last year inside Davidson County. They filed some lawsuits that they won originally, then they lost on appeal. But what they want, the people want, the Democrats want same-day registration, same-day vote. And you can't verify someone that quick. You can't talk to other states if they're from other states, and it's a horrendous idea. And so we fought back against that at every turn, and we will continue to fight back against that. We want people to vote, but there also should be a deadline to register to vote. And if you can't meet that deadline and you've had years to do it, then same day vote, same day registration, whatever. And so we also pushed back on ballot harvesting. That was another issue. We passed legislation to stop ballot harvesting. And what that was is people knew when the early votes, absentee ballots were going to be sent out, they would walk around and try to gather them all up and turn them all in. We stopped that process as well inside the state of Tennessee, so we don't have ballot harvesting. Then we have people who say, well, we don't want to have any drop-off boxes like they do, because the other thing they had in other states is they had these drop-off boxes, and so you could go throw in your ballots. But I have to remind them, we don't have drop-off boxes in the state of Tennessee. You can mail them through the post office and they get there, but we don't have those boxes, and nor will we have those boxes. We want to have free and fair elections. We have early voting, which gives you ample time to go vote. It really does, several weeks. And then you still have election day to go vote. And so we feel like that we have the process in place to do that. The watermark was an important part of this year's election integrity, which other states are starting to adopt. Because when you look at what happened in Pennsylvania and other states, I wasn't there. We think there was fraud. I can't say 100% because I'm not there. But when you have paper ballots that can be copied on a printer and printed out and look just the same, it creates the possibility of election fraud, right? So the other day, Secretary Hargett came in with Mark Goins, and we do have a unique watermark. It will change every election. So if someone wants to try to steal it, it's going to be very, very hard. And it's going to be one of those watermarks. Guess what? You can't see it with the human eye. So at that point, you're going to have to wait and try to figure it out for yourself. But we are continuing to push back to make sure that the people who fought and defended our country and gave us the right to be here, to be America, that we protect the system in place that has made America and our state the greatest place on earth to live.
I want to thank you, Cameron and Paul, for everything you do for Tennessee. Thank both of you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for being here. And the state of Tennessee has closed over 10 hospitals, in the past few years. And our Cumberland County Hospital in Crossville now serves 2 counties. And as you can see in Fairfield Glade, we have an elderly population. The state has also refused to accept Medicaid expansion, which would help 300,000 people, and I've heard is $900 million. And we know of people that have waited days, and you can blame COVID, you can blame whatever you want, but days in the emergency room, and then they have to be shipped out when they find another hospital to put them in. This is really a burden, and I just want to know why we haven't accepted that money.
Yeah. So let me touch on the first part about hospitals closing and give you just a little story that's personal to me because I was involved. There was a hospital that closed in a small rural county right here in the Upper Cumberland. There was an individual actually from Cumberland County that went in and tried to reopen that hospital. There's like 5 physicians in this small town and county. The problem that they had as far as trying to get the hospital up and going was getting those physicians to recommend or admit patients into that rural hospital. Instead, they would send them to Livingston Regional, or they would send them to Cookeville, or they would send them into a hospital in Kentucky because this county borders Kentucky. That individual, basically, it was kind of a doomsday type situation as far as him trying to reopen that hospital just simply because the doctors in his own community would not send patients to that hospital. Now we have Fentress County that had a hospital that was owned by an individual who was actually a European. That hospital has recently been bought by Fentress County, and so they're planning on opening that. Now I'm going to address the Medicaid expansion that you're talking about. A couple of years ago, we passed the Medicaid block grant, which is for TennCare. And because the federal government has accepted that, and many thought that the Biden administration would roll that block grant back, but instead they haven't. And so TennCare has been in the process of moving forward with TennCare 3 is basically what it's called. And the reason that I mention that, in that block grant, we knew that the parameters that we could set within the block grant itself, that we would be able to cover more people within the state of Tennessee that you usually refer to as far as the 300,000 that need coverage. But I can also tell you that TennCare rolls have continued to increase over the last number of years. It's as if when that number is always given, it's like Tennessee just isn't covering individuals. But we have increased TennCare numbers significantly over the past several years of those that do not have health care or can't afford health care. So I think we're on a pathway of being able to cover individuals that can afford health care, but at the same time, when we didn't take that money from the federal government, there was a guarantee that they were going to pay 90% of it for an X number of years, and then after that, Tennesseans, each and every one of you in this room, would have been more and more responsible for the dollars that it would have cost to have added those. But the way that we ultimately took the path of the block grant, we'll be able to continue to draw those dollars down from the federal government through our TennCare program in the same way that we're currently doing today.
Yeah, so on the hospitals, there's a misconception on the hospitals that people think the hospital is closed because we didn't expand Medicaid. That's not truthful at all. That's not accurate at all. What you have is you have a hospital system that has never changed like a normal business. The healthcare model has changed. In order to compete now with reduced provider rates, with reduced funding from the federal government, you know that in our Medicare program in our state of Tennessee, because we're a low-cost state, we manage our money and we have a good economy, we get paid less than what California does for the same service, right? They get more than a dollar for a dollar. We get like 82 cents on the dollar. Not because we have inferior care, just because we're a conservative state that manages our money well, right? I mean, that's crazy. It is. So if you're a high-cost, high-tax state that runs through the roof, well, the feds are going to give you more money. Okay? That's a backwards model. And so we've had the capability in our state of hospitals, they're having to figure out how to change like normal businesses have to do. And having rural hospitals in counties that's less than 30 or 40,000 people, or having 3 rural hospitals in a 4-county area is not the business model, unfortunately. And so what we have tried to do is come in with legislation to change what the definition of a hospital is, to have a micro hospital. One that has to have everything, but that fits the needs of those communities. Salina closed not because of Medicaid, but because the physicians weren't supporting their own hospital. You can't make a run of anything if you don't have your community supporting your hospital. That's a fact. You had other hospitals that had so much disrepair, they had to shut it down because the maintenance was too much to keep it open. You have other hospitals that have to close because guess what? Providers don't want to go into rural areas anymore. So they could not recruit the physicians and the people needed to keep the hospital running. So the issues of hospitals closing in our state is not a Medicaid expansion problem. It's just a business model. And what you have seen is you've seen in Jamestown and Fitchers County, them coming back to take over a hospital from someone who could not even meet their payroll. So you had a guy living out of the country who would take the money into the bank one night and flush it overseas the next day, and left the board of directors having to figure out how to make payroll. They can't stay open like that. So you can't say that what Medicaid expansion would have done would have kept anything open. But what you have done is you've had hospitals take on bigger roles. You've seen Covenant take on bigger roles. You've seen Cookeville take on bigger roles. We're trying to change and allow micro hospitals to come into these areas. But a bigger issue is also about substance abuse and mental health. And so we're trying to partner with those hospitals that closed that we can reopen to see if we can provide mental health services or behavioral health services in those communities, because that's just as needed. But I will tell you, I went to CMS about 4 years ago under Speaker Harwell's direction to talk to CMS about Medicaid expansion because Governor Haslam wanted to do it. And I don't know if most of y'all weren't here at this time, but when Phil Bredesen became governor, he had to disenroll over 200,000 people from TennCare. Think about it. 200,000 people had to be kicked off. Why? Because people were using it as a political ploy to get people on. And it became so bloated that Tennessee could not afford what was happening. He had to disenroll 200,000 people. He was a Democrat. He made the right decision because he had to, otherwise the state was going to go under. That was a hard decision. We went to CMS and we talked to them because here's the thing about expansion that no one wants to talk about. Our TennCare program, for us to make a change, if we wanted to say we wanted to change that lid from green to red, whose permission you think we have to have? The federal government. If we said we wanted to make this a half-size bottle, whose permission do we need to have? The federal government. And that's just in the TennCare program. What they wanted to do on expansion was even more restrictive than our control over the current TennCare program. So we sat down with them. We talked about, here's the things that we'd like to do. We'd like to do a fiscal conservative model, only put in people, let's talk about behavioral health. We want to do mental health and substance abuse first because that was our biggest need in the state. It didn't care if we got the match. You should not make policy decisions because someone's giving you free money. That's how you make bad policy. If it makes sense, you do it. But the restrictions were so tough, we had no control. We had less control than we currently do under the TennCare model. And we talked to them for 20 minutes about what happened under the Bredesen administration and how we disenrolled 200,000 people, and we do not want to go through that again. It was a bad experience for our state. We went through it for 20 minutes. It was only a 30-minute meeting. We spent the next 7 minutes talking about the things that we wanted to do. At the end, they looked at us and they said, why can't y'all just add everybody on and disenroll them if it's not working? Which tells you that they were not in it for policy. They were in it to just say they had X number of people covered and that's all they cared about. They didn't care about your health. They didn't care about what the state needed. They didn't care about anything other than the number on the sheet for them to report back. So we left there saying, you know what, they don't want to work with us. They don't want us to create a plan that we think would be beneficial. And so we didn't do it. But you can't make policy decisions because someone's going to give you free money. Walk out on this street and have somebody say, hey, can you deliver this bag and I'll give you $10. I hope you check the bag before you deliver it, right? You don't want to do that. And that's why we push back on it.
Okay, I have a few questions. The first one is more broad for the whole country. In today's world, the news does not report both sides. So how is the Republican Party going to get across to all the citizens of all the things that are wrong? I mean, the Democrats they're listening to the normal news stations and they're not hearing all the bad things that's happening. You know, like Biden can do no wrong. I mean, they don't talk about the border. How are you going to get across to normal people so they would vote Republican how screwed up this country has become? Because they're thinking everything's wonderful because they're listening to the normal news stations. And if you don't listen to Fox, you don't hear anything else. No, really, you don't. You don't hear anything bad. If Trump was in office, they've been crucifying for everything. You hear nothing bad against Biden. You don't.
Well, and so to your point.
How do you battle that?
Well, obviously, you get most of your news from Fox News, and based on your statement, okay, there you go. And so someone hollered out Newsmax. There's a lot of conservative media out there that individuals have to seek out as far as being able to get the news that they need. I agree, the mainstream media isn't going to tell the full story, if you will, and it's usually skewed in one way or the other. Some people say Fox is skewed in one way or the other, but But you're in a room full of individuals today that I'm sure many agree with you. And I would say that if you walked out this door today and you guys wanted to create a group and be able to share your ideas and make sure that what needs to be reported is reported, you could do that.
Well, like the infrastructure package, which is basically very little for that.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't that more publicized about how stupid the whole thing is, because it's going for other things that have nothing to do with infrastructure? And so people are thinking, oh yeah, we need this money for that, but it's hardly any of it's going to that.
Well, I think that's the problem you have with Washington, right? I mean, I think that's a unique Washington problem. We don't have that problem in Tennessee. And so I think you electing good people like John Rose, who can turn around and tell you that infrastructure bill is not just roads and bridges, it's what they call human infrastructure. It could be this other stuff. And so in Tennessee, we're set up a little different. So when we pass legislation, it has to curtail exactly what's in there. You can't have multiple subjects in there. You can't have road infrastructure mixed in with human infrastructure per se. Washington, they just throw out the reconciliation bill and they throw in the kitchen sink and your washer and dryer potentially, right? And so I think part of it is there's groups being formed. I see Linda Clark was right there. There she is. She has a group that meets. Other people have groups that meet. And it takes everybody getting back and having those conversations to keep others informed, right? But also know that in order for people to be informed, they can't be immediately turned off when you're trying to express yourself, because then you lose that capability of getting your message across. And so I think as Republicans, we need to do a better job of keeping the people informed. We do a great job here in Cumberland County. I mean, heavy Republican area. Other states are a little bit different. But the devil's always in the details in those federal budgets, and I think the state Republican Party does a good job here. National Republican Party is a little bit different. But it's a tough issue. It's a tough issue to talk about, but I believe that John Rose is a great congressman, and he helps us navigate through that sort of stuff. But Washington is a mess on how they do their legislation and how they do appropriations.
Okay, last question. You mentioned before how the federal government put all their refugees to the Republican states.
Tried, yes.
Okay, and so now we've got all these illegals that are in the country also. Obviously, they're pushing them all to the Republican states, and then now Biden wants to push everybody to be citizens quicker. So that's not going to protect us voting Republican in Tennessee. It's going to change, because you got all these other people that are going to vote Democrat because they're being allowed to come here.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what they're battling out in Washington, right? Which is with amnesty and citizenship and how quickly for people who are legal and not go through the system. I mean, the problem you have, I don't serve in Washington, but the problem you have is you have people who came into our country legally, who did it the right way, who are being told it took you years to do it. It took you years to just take the citizenship test, and we're just going to turn a blind eye to you and tell all these people who walked across the border illegally that they can do it. That's not right. That's just not right in anybody's book. And that's why we need to make sure that next year we take back Congress, we take back the Senate, and we work to take back the president. We want people to come to America. We want people to be citizens, but there's a legal path to do that, and we should try that path and not allow the illegals to come in to take over.
Good afternoon. Am I okay on the mic? There, I'm better on the mic. I want to commend you very, very heartfelt for the depth and breadth of factual information that you've shared with us today. Very few people can do that, to come to a meeting with a broad range of questions and be absolutely factual in your comments to us, and I find that extremely unusual and very, very helpful, and I commend you for it.
Thank you.
Now to my question. I hope you can fill in the blanks because I can't. But there's an executive order just issued, 83 or 86. I can't remember which one it is. 83. Okay. And I did read it, and it did look to me like it does enable or even order the development of encampments when there's an emergency order declared by the governor or federally that allows under emergency orders that the National Guard be allowed to accompany people to be in the encampment. And I know that constitutional rights are diminished to a sad point when there is an emergency or disaster proclaimed by the government that will allow them to take steps. But with Governor Lee signing this and enabling it now to be developed, where these camps can be developed before they're needed, it may be 5 years down the road, it may be 10, but it still exists that we can be put into an encampment if we do not cooperate with the orders issued by the governor. Could you respond to that?
You want to go first?
Well, those executive orders have an expiration date on them. And so they are set to expire at a certain date, and the executive order should have mentioned that. Secondly, I heard from a lot of constituents like yourself in regards to that. And so in consultation with the governor's office, I think that they would have worded their executive order differently had they have known people would have interpreted the way that it was written. I think that whenever you talk about the encampments and so forth and the use of the National Guard, he was basically empowering the National Guard to be able to come to a community. Let's just say that your EMS in Cumberland County they were totally infected by COVID and they had no EMS workers to be able to work. It gave the National Guard the ability to come in to Cumberland County and to run those ambulances. Let's say your sheriff's department was totally infected by COVID and you didn't have any deputies. It would give those National Guardsmen the ability to come in and provide protection throughout the county. When you talk about the encampments or the tents, there are many hospitals that we saw this in 2020. We saw Vanderbilt Hospital take a floor of their parking garage and turn it into like a triage center because they were expecting so many people with COVID to come in. And I think this was where the misconception came in at, is that this was allowing those hospitals to be able to build on their parking lots or on their property triage facilities to be able to treat people in the event that there was just such a huge influx of those individuals coming in. So that's my answer. The speaker may...
No, yeah, Paul's right. So the title of the executive order was not well written and was not the intent of what they were doing first. And that executive order was put out a year before as well, the same thing, right? And so he didn't put out all the executive orders, he put out some other stuff. So it was put out the year before, but it doesn't do, the intent is it doesn't do what it seems like it does. It should be reworded and reworked, but it's really what Paul has said. And so what it does allow is, and they had the capability to do this, if you have the hospitals that overrun, if they get overrun, then you have the capability of going to, in Davidson County, to the Nashville Convention Center, and that executive order will allow them to set that up as a hospital. And allow them to operate that with extra beds. It allowed them to, the year before, to buy the old commercial appeal building in Memphis and turn that into a triage hospital because they thought they might need some extra beds. It was more about adding capacity into the healthcare place than it was about creating an encampment that you would put people in whether they were vaccinated or unvaccinated.
My last thought on that was that on the simple reading, on the black and white reading of it, it doesn't say that you can't have people involuntarily moved into an encampment if it suggests you can. So if you could just encourage them to rewrite that out.
Oh, yeah, we have. Yeah, we have.
But believe me, he heard from us in regards to that. But you know, it's kind of the milk was already spilled, and so the executive order was in place. But the administration fully admitted that the wording was not in the spirit of what they fully meant. But again, I just want to reiterate to all of you in here that these executive orders have expiration.
They're 90 days. They last 90 days.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Good day, and again, like everyone else here, I want to express appreciation for you both being here today. And I would love to one day address you as Governor Sexton.
Me too. I want to do that too. And before you start, I don't know if he's realized this, but the First Lady has just come in too. She came in just a little bit ago.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Lacey.
You addressed a couple of questions that I had earlier on in your comments, but would like to kind of narrow one down concerning the vaccination coming in, and to give you a reality. And I do this to give you maybe ammunition if you so need. I serve on the board of directors of an agency that has well over 100 employees. I also serve on the advisory board of another agency that also has over 100 employees. We are getting communication from the federal government telling us that soon President Biden is going to give a mandate that our employees are either vaccinated or terminated, and there's no leadway in between concerning test. It's black and white. You either vaccinate or terminate. We're getting this communication, and it's coming at us. And we did an assessment, and our concern is we're looking very possibly of losing over 12% of our employee base of qualified, experienced people. And like you mentioned a while ago, for the first time in history, both these agencies are experiencing a lack of applicants for jobs. And so my question is, what or can the state government do concerning a federal mandate to a federally funded program?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And so that's one of the things that we're discussing for the week of October 27th, about what can we do. One thing is, you know, the first one was you had to take the vaccine or you had to show that you were test negative. In our mind, if they make the employee or the employer to do that, that's taxation, kind of like Obamacare was. It should be ruled unconstitutional. You can't do that. He might be changing his tune, but then I think it's up to our state, and our Attorney General just released a letter, I think yesterday or today, talking about as soon as those OSHA regulations come out or guidelines, we're prepared to sue the federal government to protect the employees of Tennessee.
So there may be light at the end of the tunnel that the state can intercede with a federal mandate of a federally funded program.
We can take it in court and try to do an injunction like they did to us on the election integrity bill. But yeah, so we can file a lawsuit to try to get an injunction, protect our employees for various reasons. And the other day I had the opportunity to meet Vice President Pence. He was in Nashville meeting with the governor, and so had a conversation with him about when he was ahead of the task force. But he was talking about OSHA. His thing is using OSHA is unconstitutional in the first place, because what OSHA is designed for is not the purpose of what they're using it for. So he feels like there's even ample room there to push back and say that that's not a requirement that OSHA can put forth. They're trying to circumvent Congress because they know they can't get it through the Senate, and so they're trying to figure out how to get it around. And basically, we need to hold for a good another 18 months in order for us to get the right Congress and the right Senate in place to really make some changes up there as well.
Thank you very much.
And let me say also that they haven't given us the emergency rule to his executive order. And I think that's on purpose, because number one, the COVID numbers have definitely been on a decline over the last couple of weeks or 3 weeks. And they also, OSHA is regulated in the state of Tennessee by TOSHA. So TOSHA is the OSHA. Well, there's only 8 to... Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's only 8 or 9 inspectors in the state of Tennessee as far as TOSHA is concerned. We actually have 30 days after the emergency rule is delivered to implement. So again, back to Speaker Sexton's point, Attorney General Slattery is ready to go with a lawsuit once that comes out.
Okay.
Tennessee is going to fight that. We've heard from businesses from all across the state, and they definitely think that that is a federal overreach. I can also tell you that a few weeks ago I was at a conference that had a lot of companies from all across the United States. Some were union companies, and even the union companies are really, really pushing back against the Biden administration for that very same executive order. So I'm sure he is trying to figure out, or someone is trying to figure out. I don't know if he remembers what he ate for breakfast this morning. But trying to figure out a way of escape, if you will, from that executive order to where he'll at least be able to save some face in that.
And so the federal funded programs will not be set aside exempt from this effort, you think?
You're talking about federal funding for those programs coming down?
Yeah. They're going to use that as federal funded regulation for a federally funded program.
Correct.
Do you think that's going to be okay?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think too what they're wanting to do is they're telling hospitals that they have to follow through or they'll withhold the Medicare funding, right?
Yep.
And so the hospitals are trying to weigh it themselves, but I think the state will intervene through the Attorney General to try to do a suit with other states to push back on why we think, the way it is nowadays, it depends on what court you filed in, which state you want to file it in, which circuit you want to, and all that matters. And so I think that's why the Republican governors have been trying to all be on the same page, knowing that they're just waiting for the opportunity to come on when those come out and where's the best place to file the suits and all the other ones join in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're getting close to the end, so I've got the gentleman back here, and I believe the lady behind. Do you have a question also, ma'am? Yep, okay, and then this lady over here. So we'll take those three folks, and then we're going to have to stop the questions because these guys need to get...
I would like to echo everyone's comments about you joining us today, and quite frankly, I'm disappointed that it's not standing room only. I think we have a duty to tell our friends and neighbors about these forums, and hopefully we can increase the attendance here, and hopefully in the future we'll have more of these, and Mayor Foster as well. This has been a great give and take, and we thank you for being here, and we thank everyone for their thoughtful questions too. Earlier you talked about communication and the ability to have civil conversation, so thank you for doing that, and hope we can do that in the future. My comment is, in addition to what Linda's comment was about cycling, and I know this is a niche issue for many of us, but more and more people are coming here with the intent of being very active, and they're coming from states where they rode bicycles, like in Illinois and Wisconsin and Iowa, and it was very level. And they come here and they realize it's very hilly. So the increase of e-bikes is spiking here in the Glade. More and more people are riding e-bikes. The cycling club is very active, and we're growing numbers every week with participation. But there are many of us as well who ride either by ourselves or in groups of 2 or 3. So my comment is, in addition to Linda's about Peavine Road and the striping and the signage, and that is around the safety issue here in the Glade. The roads in the Glade are not like Peavine. We don't have wide shoulders. We have no shoulders. So there's really no opportunity for striping. But there is opportunity for signage. And there are many signs available about share the road, watch for cyclists, pass with 3 feet, room with a cyclist, and that sort of thing. So I would encourage the community club, Mayor Foster, to work together to find ways to add signage, at least on some of the very busy roads. Now, some neighborhood streets, that's probably not necessary. But there are many cyclists who ride the busy roads here in the Glade. And my guess is, when we're out driving on Fairfield roads, we're not thinking about cyclists. We're thinking about where we're going. We may be getting a text. We may be on the phone. So I would encourage the community club and Mayor Foster to work together to find out ways to add signage here in the Glade, because we have growth of residents and cycling. We're seeing Wyndham guests bring their bikes whether it's a regular bike or an e-bike for the Glade for their time here in the Glade. So more and more people are on the road on their bicycles. And so when you see me out on the road, please honk and wave.
Just honk one time. Don't honk multiple.
Honk one time and go way around, please. There are many that go. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Ma'am, would you like to go ahead and finish off there, and then we'll wrap up over here.
I just wonder if you'd talk a little bit about CRT in our schools and what we have to worry about in the school boards.
School.
Well, we passed legislation this year to ban CRT in our school system. And I would like to say that also was led in the House by your speaker and your representative, Cameron Sexton. So that was. So we heard our constituents loud and clear during legislative session. The good news is that we heard from you early enough that we could take action during our session to deal with it this year, and we didn't have to wait until the 2022 session. So that was very good. The speaker can weigh in.
Well, I mean, I think what we did is we didn't call it CRT or critical race theory because you can always change the title of something to keep doing what you want to do. So what the legislation did is it put into the state standards certain things that were of the CRT that are no longer can't be part of the standards, but also laid out that when you teach, it should be based on fact and not opinion and other things like that you can back up. Because you shouldn't be afraid to have the conversations if they're about fact, but when you start trying to have opinion and other things put in, then that starts creating problems. But we did lay it out into the state standards, so it's there. We'll be happy to get you a copy of that as you go. What happens, the next question we usually get is, so what happens if we find a school or a teacher who's doing this? And so what we have the capability of doing is taking their BEP funding from them, and which is a huge consequence if they're caught teaching it in the school systems.
And the teacher can also be charged with a misdemeanor in regards to that. So we tried to put enough teeth into it that number one, the school system would make sure that they taught history in the proper way, and that if they did have a rogue teacher, that there was some consequences to them going outside of what the state wanted them to teach.
Can I do a follow-up? What happens at the college level for a state-funded school? Because obviously it could have a major impact going forward in other training programs.
Well, so we had problems at University of Tennessee until Randy Boyd came in, and we've been able to work well with him to change how UT's been operating. They were doing some things that they're not doing anymore. But I think it's one of those things where higher education, anywhere you go, is an issue with what's being taught or how it's being taught or what's being there. I've seen it with my two kids who went through college when they come home and we have conversations. So it's always going to be a struggle. We're working on some stuff for next year that will help to do some changes in higher education and offer some different alternatives in higher education. But it's going to take us time to go in there and level the playing field per se.
I have a freshman that's in college. He's going to a school in Memphis, and it's been very interesting, the phone calls that I've received, because one of the things that I said, Caleb, when you go to college, your Christian conservative values are going to be tested. This is going to be a time as to whether or not you have a good core value system as far as being a Christian and conservative. So it's been, the first phone call I received was him telling me that his advisor is an admitted Marxist. So I'm serious. I mean, he calls, he said, Dad, well, first of all, he and 4 other students are in the room meeting with their advisor, and he sends me a text, Dad, you're not going to believe what my advisor just told me. And so I said, well, call me. And so he calls me later. And then other stories that he's called and shared with me about his college experience. And each time I remind him, look, this is your challenge to your Christian conservative values that you've been raised with. And so It's always interesting to hear a college perspective, and I know the speakers to older children have definitely gone through that, and he can share stories as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Cameron and Senator Bailey, it's good to see you today. But to start, I'd like to say that, Cameron, I think your next job should be first gentleman, because I'll vote for Lacey and Anita. I'll even go
I know
knock
you
on
like
doors.
her. I know.
I'll go knock on doors. Just a couple of things. You commented about cutting back on unemployment, and specifically in the healthcare sector, slower return to work from people who had been on unemployment. And I think you mentioned that in the next, not in the special session, but next session, starting in January, you're going to reevaluate unemployment then and some of the social services, or is that coming up in the session?
So we, on the unemployment bill, we moved it back to 12 weeks. It's tied into the unemployment rate. If it's 5.5% or below for a 6-month average, you only get 12 weeks. If it's a 6% average, it's 13 weeks. If it's 6.5, it's 14. So if the unemployment's high, you get more unemployment, but you get capped at 20 weeks. The idea of unemployment is not to live on it, but to give you the time to get to another job. And so that's what we're trying to do. The other part is next year for unemployment, what we're looking at is we hear from businesses all the time who people are on unemployment, and they come in to interview, or they get these calls and say, "Are you hiring?" And they go, "Yes." And they go, "Okay." And the people never come to the appointment. They never do anything. They just satisfy, which by state law is they have to look for 3 jobs. And that's all they do. There's no follow-up from the state. They don't take what the business say. And so we want to be able to say, if you're on unemployment and there's a job available and it's equivalent to what you were making and what you were doing, you should take it if you were offered it. And that's where we're trying to, or you lose your benefits.
Well, my only comment was that a lot of the data that I've seen is that the reason why a lot of people are unemployed is because of lack of daycare, including people who had businesses that closed during COVID and have been unable to reopen. So it's just a thought that perhaps maybe some of the savings from unemployment could somehow be used as incentives with daycare, because that's a big reason.
Well, I mean, I think there are people who would say that that's the case. I don't think that's majority of the case. But what I will say is, you have jobs that are available. You can go right now in Crossville and take a job for $15 an hour, no questions asked, and you can be hired. Paul will hire you right now. You might not want to be a truck driver.
I've got applications.
But you can go make very good money with Paul. And you can. And so,
disagree with that.
And so part of the problem, though, is it's a twofold edge. Is you have one side that says we don't have daycare and I can't go to work. And then you got the federal government who's telling you have to quarantine if you've been within 6 feet of somebody more than 15 minutes, and you got to stay home for 2 weeks, or your kids can't go to school for 7 days, and you can't go to work. So what you have is you have a whole hodgepodge of policies that are designed not to get people back to work. And so we need to get back to where people get back to work and where people will want to work. And when you have a tax system that's done by the progressive Democrats that tax your wages, and the more you make, the more you pay, the incentive to work more to get ahead is not there. And so we want to be a country, we want to be a state for opportunity and hope. And if you want to work 2 jobs to get ahead, you should not be penalized for doing that. And unfortunately, sometimes you are.
I appreciate your comments, but that's not exactly what I was speaking about.
Well, I was just stating my opinion.
I was just saying that when you do look at this issue as speaker, it's something worthwhile to look into about the situation with daycares that have closed as a result of COVID, and what if perhaps anything the state can do in that regard. That's my only point.
Well, I mean, what you have too is you have businesses who open up their own daycares as part of their policy, right? And because businesses are going to do what they can do to keep their employees. You know, we have daycare money that goes out to people who need it. We also have public assistance go out. We created a committee, and for the first time, we have the capability of having a committee with legislators and the public who are on it, who will say at the end of the 2-year pilot, did these policies actually work or did they not? Because what you find in government is they just throw money out there and they just throw a policy out there, and 10 years later, they don't know if it works or not. And I think in Tennessee, under Republican control, we're actually going to hold the departments accountable. If they say this will do X, Y, Z, we're going to make sure it does X, Y, Z, or we're not going to do the program anymore. And so I think there's a better opportunity for us to be more efficient.
Thank you. I had one more thing I wanted to say. Senator Bailey, I appreciate very much your comments about your decision to be vaccinated, about, everybody says to speak with your doctor, but you went on to say that you have some close friends or family that passed away.
Yeah,
and if I could finish.
Sure.
My brother passed away last year from COVID, which, that's just an anecdotal story. But the bigger thing that I would ask people, I agree. It shouldn't be mandated, but I would just add that some consideration for people who are working in the healthcare industry. I have a close relative who works in a large hospital in a Tennessee city, and just recently, her entire floor was turned into a COVID floor for people who aren't intubated but are below that level. And she is. If you saw this girl. It's just horrible, and all across, you see it all across social media. All I'm saying is urging people to also consider our healthcare workers who are on the front lines for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's all. Thank you.
And so, just simply because you mentioned it, I did tell the personal story about a very dear friend of mine losing 3 family members.
Yeah.
And when I decided to consider getting vaccinated, I called 3 doctors.
Right.
And then I spoke to my pharmacist. And the fact is they all agreed on which vaccine that I should get. The pharmacist agreed on the vaccine that I should get. So I guess it was just divine intervention at that time. So, but in any case, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood. I sought out my physicians and my doctor's advice on what I should do. Yes, I saw the struggles of a friend, but at the same time, I was following the same advice that I give to everyone.
Right. Thank you, Senator Bailey.
Hey, sir, we got through the flu. A lot of people say, you forget about that. A lot of people die from the flu every year. We're going to get through this, too.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am. Last question.
This will be very quick. One thing. I would like to make a suggestion that we are going to have food shortages. And does Tennessee have any kind of plan to help with that with our state people? That if it is a problem, can you help? Secondly, I'm afraid that CRT may come into our county. I've been to the board and I'm shook off by one of the members who is in the development curriculum area. They are doing a new one, a 4.200 is a new curriculum, and it is based on a pluralistic community. Now that sounds to me like a skirt issue. So I would really urge you to sit with Penny Schwinn up in Nashville. She's got a little bit of a background that I don't know if anybody knows, but she's hopped from state to state, and I'm questioning her. But anyway, I hope that we don't see CRT in another form here. But can you address the food shortages?
Well, I think, we've put back hundreds of millions of dollars of money for COVID-related items for something that may happen in the future that we're not sure of. And we sort of did the same thing when people were needing PPE equipment and they couldn't get it. The state jumped in to try to buy some to do some stuff. We have money set aside if there are food shortages and that sort of stuff. It goes back to, President Biden wants to talk about leadership, and he was always talking about leadership and it matters who lead. And all of a sudden, in not much time at all, more people have died from COVID than under President Trump. You have food less than there was other. Gas prices are through the roof. Inflation is very high. And so all of a sudden, there's things that we have to think about that we didn't have to think about before. And that's where we also need to get back to allowing people to farm. And I think what you saw last year and this year, more people getting back to having their own garden. I know when I grew up, my family had their own garden, a small garden. At some point, we got away from that. And I think you've seen that, but we shouldn't tell our farmers not to grow stuff. We're going to pay you not to grow stuff. We need to get back to the days of allowing our farmers to do our food supply. And whenever I was with Mike Pence, he goes, the number one thing, and he admitted, he goes, I was wrong about China when I was in Congress. I was absolutely wrong about free trade with China. He goes, they do not have anybody's best interests at heart. We got to do everything that we push back on them, and all they're trying to do is harm us. And so his point is America needs to depend on America again and not depend on our allies and the people overseas. And I think overall, we have to change economically and our policy-wise on how we get back to being the America that grows our own food, that builds our own stuff, and that has our own products.
Exactly. That's what we need.
Are y'all mentioning it to all your districts that maybe some plan can be put into play about working with the farmers in each district?
There is. I mean, we were looking, one of the things that we saw during COVID is grocery sales went through the roof. You have more people eating at the dinner table. And think about that. When everybody in this room was growing up, you ate at the dinner table with your parents. That's just what you did. And then we became a society where we didn't do that much anymore. And so it's interesting to see society shift back to people eating at home again. You want to support restaurants, I understand, but you saw people wanting to eat at home again. You saw more products moving off the grocery shelves that were before. We saw more people wanting to buy beef from a butcher than we ever saw. And so we're trying to put money in our state because we do not have, like, if you're trying to sell your cattle for beef, you have to basically wait for 2 years to get an opening to slaughter. Right? 2 years. So as a state, what we're trying to do is we're looking at putting more money and investing it into places like that and building 5 to 7 more to meet the demand, to your point, of what people are needing and get the food to the consumer a whole lot quicker, where you don't have to plan out as soon as the calf's born that you have to get it to the slaughterhouse. So there's a lot of things that we can do.
Thank you very much, and thank y'all for being here.
All right.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Government Relations Committee, thank you both to Speaker Sexton and to Senator Bailey for joining us today. And we also want to thank each and every one of you for coming out this afternoon and spending time with them. So that's the end of our program. These gentlemen need to move quickly to get out of here. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.